Hey everyone, what's going on? It is Voodoo 51292 here. The camera looks like it's pointed too far down a little bit, so I'll just move it up. And welcome to Voodoo's Verdict. And this Voodoo's Verdict is a follow-up to my verdict I did back in November of last year when I reviewed episode 1 of the Burial at Sea DLC for BioShock Infinite. This video is going to be me reviewing episode 2 of the Burial at Sea DLC that I beat in one full sitting today on release day, March 25th of 2014. This review is probably going to be one on the longer side of things, simply because I am such a huge fan of the BioShock series, and I have, quite a bit to say about this DLC, and I want to make sure I say my piece and get everything out on the table. So, episode 1, when I played it and reviewed it back in November, I had, some negative things, some criticisms to say about it. I felt that it was a really short DLC, for one, and I felt that the best parts of the DLC were in the first, 30 minutes or so of the DLC, and then the rest of it was kind of a bland, going through the motions kind of DLC that, although had some interesting story elements and certainly had an interesting ending, really for the most part was kind of a uninspired, DLC just to say, oh, we have a DLC where you're back in Rapture. So I said, all right, well, that's episode 1. Let's go to episode 2 because, let's not judge episode 2 based on episode 1 because, episode 2 is it. This is the DLC that is, not only going to wrap up the Burial at Sea story, but is going to wrap up, the BioShock story as a whole. This is it. This is the last bit of BioShock, gameplay that there's ever going to be. Irrational shutting down after this DLC. This is it. This is Ken Levine and Irrational Games' last run on BioShock, and this is their chance to wrap everything up. And so, what are they going to do for episode 2? And that's what I'm going to be talking about. So, right off the bat, episode 2 is a much longer DLC than part 1. I would say it's, 2 or 3 hours longer than part 1. I'd say this DLC is probably around 5 to 6 hours of gameplay as opposed to episode 1, which is about 3 to 4. So this is a much longer and substantial DLC. So right off the bat, that's an improvement over the first one. There's a lot more content, and it doesn't feel, unneeded. It doesn't feel unnecessary. It feels like all the content is interesting and needed in there, and it doesn't really drag on, which is good. So, lots of stuff to talk about here. First, let's set up the premise of episode 2. And, in this review, I will be spoiling stuff from episode 1. Not episode 2, because I don't spoil anything from games that I'm currently reviewing, but since this is a direct sequel to episode 1, I'm going to be talking about plot elements from episode 1 in this review. So, spoiler warning for episode 1 if you haven't played that yet. So, having let everybody know that, let's continue. So, the game picks up right where episode 1 of Burial at Sea ended. Right after Elizabeth had the Big Daddy basically kill Comstock, and you come to find out that Elizabeth has been basically jumping between a bunch of these worlds. It's kind of a pseudo-assassin going to these different worlds where Comstock exists and wiping them out and eliminating them, and she, did the same thing here with Comstock, and, you find out that the little girl you had been going after the whole time had become a little sister, and so that's where the first DLC ended. So we jump to the start of episode 2, and you're basically, after a really cool intro sequence, which I'm not going to spoil, more or less you are, right back where you were, right, you're like knocked out on the floor right next to where Comstock's body is, and again, this isn't really spoiling too much because they've released this in trailers that they've shown for this, so I have no problem talking about things that are in trailers. You wake up and you are confronted by Atlas, who is there, and a couple of his goons, and he's basically threatening to kill you right where you are because you're an intruder into his space, and more or less you're able to convince Atlas that, because remember, you're in this prison that they sunk off of Rapture, and that's where all these guys are trapped, you were able to convince Atlas that you have the means to get them and this prison back up to the city of Rapture. And so he listens to you. He lets you go on the stipulation that you help him get back to Rapture, and he's supposed to hold up his end of the bargain and give you the little girl. And so that's really Elizabeth's main goal here, is she's going to try to do this for Atlas and his crew so that she can get the little sister back. And that's the overarching plot of the story. But of course, it's BioShock, and more importantly, BioShock Infinite with all the multiple timelines and stuff. And so as you progress and go through the game, right from the get-go, right after the introduction, all the way through the end of the DLC, it's classic BioShock Infinite. You're going to be finding out all kinds of crazy mind-bending things. Obviously, again, multiple timelines, multiple universes play a large part in this DLC, and the plot obviously gets very convoluted and complex the more you play it, and it becomes a lot bigger than just get this, prison back up to Rapture and get the girl back. And so that's kind of the setup of the DLC. Now, gameplay. Gameplay is very different in Episode 2 than anything you've ever seen before from BioShock in general. In this DLC, you do play as Elizabeth this time around, which is very different than Comstock. And because you're playing as Elizabeth, you are a much different character. So you are not very powerful. Elizabeth's not really a fighter, okay? She's not a trained, fighter, or she's not skilled in combat. So she has very little health. And so if she gets in open combat and takes, 2 or 3 shots from somebody, she's dead. You do not have a shield in this game like Booker had. You just have a regular life bar, and it goes away very quickly. So the game really pretty much turns into a stealth game. And I know it's really weird because it's BioShock. You're like, BioShock is a stealth game? Well, in this DLC, yeah, it is. And your primary weapon that you're given in this DLC is a crossbow that shoots various kinds of darts. And the main dart is like a tranquilizer dart, a one-shot dart that puts the enemy to sleep. You get knockout gas darts, so you can shoot an enemy with this and it releases an area of effect knockout gas that'll knock out anyone in the area. And then you get something called a noisemaker dart, which you can only obtain by doing something special, which we'll talk about. But this dart allows you to shoot it somewhere. It makes a lot of noise and makes all the splicers run and check out the noise and away from you so that you can run by them into a door or whatever. In addition to that, you can also just sneak up on splicers and hit them do a sneak attack in the head with your skyhook and kill them instantly. And the enemies have something a notification meter very similar to what stealth games have, like Assassin's Creed, like Dishonored, that kind of thing, where they have like the spidey sense above their head that fills up. It's yellow when they're cautious, red when they see you, and that's kind of what the game turns into. Now, you can do open combat. You do get a couple of guns in the game. You get like the shotgun, the hand cannon. They bring back, which I was happy about, the microwave gun from Episode 1 of Burial at Sea, where you barely got to use it. They return it in this game, and you can use it. But open combat is very difficult, again, because you don't have any sort of protection, and you're Elizabeth, so you don't have, that's another thing, you don't have a teammate there with you anymore who can throw you ammo, throw you health and stuff like you did when you were Booker. You don't have that anymore, it's gone. You also cannot open tears, and there's a story plot reason that they completely explain why Elizabeth can no longer open tears in this DLC that you find out pretty early on, which is pretty cool. But you can't do it. So you are very limited in what you're able to do, much more so than Booker. So really the goal is to, sneak around enemies or take them down stealthily. And you're aided in this by a brand new plasmid that they give you pretty early on in the DLC. So it's pretty cool. They give you yet another new plasmid. This one's called Peeping Tom. And what this plasmid allows you to do is if you just tap the plasma use button, it allows you to do a quick scan of the area and will briefly show you or highlight enemies like behind walls and stuff so you can see where they are. Now if you hold the plasma use button down, this plasmid allows you to completely turn invisible. For the Bioshock fans out there, like the Chameleon Tonic from Bioshock 1, it's basically that, but you can use it actively and move around. So you can completely become invisible to sneak up on an enemy and knock them out, or become invisible and completely sneak around a bunch of enemies to a different area. Really cool plasmid and very, very helpful with the stealth. And you do get a couple of other plasmids, but not many. You get like the Possession plasmid, which can be really useful in open combat. You get Old Man Winter again from episode 1, and you get another new plasmid later on called Ironsides, and those are basically the only 4 plasmids you have to work with. So that's mainly the combat. It's very different. It's stealth based, and it feels very different from when you were playing as Booker. Now, some of the other new elements. Yeah, one of the biggest things you'll remember about Elizabeth is that she can pick locks, which she does automatically for you when you play as Booker. But now that you're Elizabeth, you manually get to pick the locks. So they work the same way in that you find lockpicks hidden around, and when you find locked doors, locked chests, that kind of thing, there's a pick requirement. And rarer items that are locked require more lockpicks. But if you have enough, you go pick the lock, and it is basically just a mini game that consists of, it basically shows you the inside of the lock, and it has 6 tumblers, and the tumblers can be coded any of these 3 colors. They can be just like a white neutral color tumbler, which if you hit that one, it will just open the door and that's it, you're good. They can be blue, which if you hit that one, it opens the door and it drops a noisemaker dart, which is the only way that you can obtain these darts in the game. Or it can be red, and if you hit the red one, it will open the door, but then a turret pops out right next to you as a security, which is a major pain in the ass. So you can't really necessarily fail any of the lock picking in the game. You can't break a lockpick or anything, but you can hit a red one and have a turret, basically in your ass. And the way it works is that they just show these 6 tumblers in a row, and they're colored just randomly across. And the mini game is that the lockpick will move across these tumblers in a random pattern. They'll just move forward and back, forward, and you don't know which way it's going to go. And the idea is when you think it's when it's on one of the tumblers that you want to hit, you press X real quick, and whatever it's on, it will knock that up, and you get the results. So it's a pretty simplistic puzzle. It can be a little challenging because the pattern of the moving is random. But worst case scenario, you have a turret pop up, but you will always open the door. So it's pretty cool. It helps with the immersion to make you, again, feel more like you're Elizabeth. You actually get to do lock picking this time around, which is pretty cool. And outside of those elements, the rest of the gameplay is very similar to what you'd expect from Bioshock. So you have several open world levels that you can go around, and of course you can just rush through and do the main objective, but there's tons of optional areas to explore where you can find locked doors and chests. You can find audio diaries. They're all over the place in this DLC, like usual for Bioshock. You can find plasma upgrades lying around, and then of course you can find money and ammo and notes and that kind of thing if you take your time to explore. So that's pretty much your gameplay in a nutshell. It's really different for Bioshock. It's really cool. I think it works naturally into the system. It's not that it's not like, wow, this is completely doesn't fit in with Bioshock. It fits in very well with the character of Elizabeth. It really makes you feel like you are playing as her. It's a very different feel. It's not just like you're playing as Booker with a different skin on. You know what I mean? It's definitely a different feel, and I liked it. Now, the stealth isn't the most challenging stealth out there for sure. I mean, it's not nearly as unforgiving as something like a Metal Gear or whatever, where you have to be really, really careful, and if you get anywhere near somebody, then they're going to see you. It's not like The Last of Us or anything like that with instant kill enemies. So if you're like a big stealth game nut and you play it, you might be like kind of turned off, like, wow, this is too easy. But I don't think anyone playing a Bioshock DLC is going to go into it expecting some high level of stealth. I mean, Bioshock's not a stealth game, It's just implemented in this, and although it's not the most challenging, it's pretty forgiving with some of the things where you can actually approach enemies from the side. A lot of stealth games, if you try to come up from the side, they'll see you. It is forgiving, but I liked it because it didn't make it annoying, it didn't make it cumbersome, and really, the gameplay is really interesting in this DLC, but for the most part, the awesome parts of this DLC are driving the story. And so I felt that they did a good job of not making, the stealth annoying and getting it cumbersome and getting in the way of the plot moving, which was really cool. So that's the deal. They do it, they do incorporate some things in there, like if you walk on broken glass or walk on water, it will make noise. That will heighten enemies' alertness or whatever. So that's pretty much the combat and the gameplay of the DLC. Really different, but really cool. So now I just want to kind of give my thoughts on the DLC and how I feel that they wrapped it up. Checking my time. Okay. And how they, put a bow on BioShock with this DLC. First of all, what I can say is that this DLC blows Episode 1 out of the water. Episode 1 to me was a disappointment. Episode 2, in my opinion, was fantastic. Number 1, as I just explained to you, the gameplay. The gameplay of Episode 1 was copy and pasted from BioShock Infinite, and they tried to copy and paste BioShock Infinite's gameplay into Rapture, and it didn't really translate that well, and it felt weird, it felt awkward, it didn't feel right. This feels great. This gameplay is awesome, it's new, it's creative, it's something totally different, and even though it's running in the same engine, it feels like you're playing something different, which is awesome, and it fits in well. It doesn't feel clunky, it doesn't feel like they tried to, fit a square into a circle hole, so to speak. It feels natural and organic, and it's awesome. That's number 1. So that's a massive improvement. Like I mentioned too, the length, much longer than Episode 1. Big advantage. But the amazement and the charm of this DLC is what it brings to longtime fans of BioShock. This DLC does an amazing job of tying up everything, of putting an end to the Rapture universe, the Columbia story, and the story of BioShock as a whole. And if you are a longtime fan of BioShock from BioShock 1, you are going to love just the experience of playing this DLC. And without spoiling too much, I mean, you will in this DLC be retracing some of your most memorable steps that you've taken in BioShock 1 as well as BioShock Infinite. You'll be retracing some steps. You will be exploring areas that will be very familiar to you, that you'll be like, man, this brings back great memories. I was here during the first game, blah, blah, blah. You actually get to experience some things in the game, in person in this DLC that you've only heard about or heard these things mentioned in audio logs in the previous games. You've listened to an event that you come in on a situation that's already happened. You listen to an audio log, and you find out what happened there, but it's already happened. Well, in this DLC, you will be able to see some of these things happen right in front of you, as they occur, rather than walking in on them later, and you'll be like, man, I remember that. I remember seeing that. I remember listening to this audio log when I played this game. Now I get to see it actually happen in front of me. Again, without spoiling, you will explore more than just Rapture. Okay? Rapture is not the only place that you will visit in this DLC. And like I said, the charm of this DLC is in the details, because although not a whole lot of huge ginormous questions are answered in this DLC except for tying everything together, because a lot of the big questions have kind of been answered already, it answers and gives a lot of background information to some of the more minor questions or something that you might have as a longtime fan of the series. Some things that you felt needed some background information on, or maybe you were just kind of wondering, like, well, why is this how it is, and then you just kind of accepted it. This DLC will provide you some of those answers. It provides you background information on a lot of really cool things. It provides more background on people. It provides a lot of background on people like Daisy Fitzroy that I think a lot of people felt like she was a really interesting character in Bioshock Infinite, but you were missing kind of some context and some background on her. Well, you get more background information on her. You get more background information on people like Suchong and the work that he was doing and all that kind of stuff. And so it's really amazing to go through this DLC and experience, like I said, the just the little things, and noticing all the details that they have in this DLC and how they wrap up certain things and how they answer some minor questions, how they provide information, how they provide background. It's like they really listen to feedback from people through the years on these games. They're like, man, we wish we had a little bit more explanation here. We wish you could fill this idea out a little bit more. And they did all of this in this DLC. And what's really cool is that you find out some of the roles and stuff that Elizabeth has to play in some of the big occurrences in Rapture, and you find out that Elizabeth, plays some of the role in some of the things that goes on in Rapture, and you're like, man, that's really cool. And it's like what you found out about the connections between Infinite and Bioshock 1, then you see that, while the characters from Bioshock 1 had such an influence on what was going on in Infinite, in this DLC you find out that the characters in Infinite had a large impact on the stuff that was happening in Bioshock 1. And the whole thing just is wrapped up very well. It goes full circle with the story, and just brings you to a point of total conclusion, wraps everything up nicely, and you just, you're satisfied. And for me, with this being my favorite game franchise of all time, I really went into this being like, man, I just hope that this is wrapped up well, because I'm going to be really disappointed as a longtime fan if they do a poor job of finishing this off. Like, I think, like a lot of people had the reaction to the ending of Mass Effect 3. I think a lot of the hardcore fans of that series were really disappointed with the way that the whole trilogy ended, and I didn't want that to happen to Bioshock, and luckily I can say it did not. Episode 2 did a brilliant job of wrapping everything up. So I will say this. If you are a fan, a longtime fan of Bioshock, you have to buy this DLC. You have to play it. You have to buy both Episode 1 and Episode 2. Episode 1 is not going to knock your socks off, and it may even bore you. It's necessary to set up the events of Episode 2, which is where the real knock your socks off, great content is. It's in Episode 2. And Episode 2 fulfilled everything I was hoping that the entire Barrel at Sea DLC would accomplish. And I was worried after Episode 1 that it was going to be disappointing, but Episode 2 fulfilled what I was hoping Bioshock Barrel at Sea would be. And I loved it. It was fantastic. I played it all in one sitting today. I couldn't put it down. I had to play it till the end. And I've heard a lot of people criticizing the DLC. I mean, it has received, really positive reviews, don't get me wrong, but people have been critiquing it and criticizing it and nitpicking on things like, well, the stealth wasn't the best in it, and, this story element we didn't really like, and this, and if you play this DLC as someone who's not a big-time fan of Bioshock, or you didn't play Bioshock 1, and you play this DLC, you're probably not going to be that impressed. Honestly, you're just not. This DLC has a lot more to do with Bioshock 1 than it does Bioshock Infinite. But if you're somebody who's a big fan of it and play it, you're not going to be nitpicking. You're going to be enjoying the experience, and you're going to enjoy being enveloped in all of this Bioshock nostalgia coming together in one. And you're not going to be nitpicking. You're going to be like, man, the gameplay is cool, it's different than what I've experienced. It challenges me in new ways, and the story and the fan service that's paid in the story is amazing as well. And so the fans of Bioshock are going to love this. Absolutely love it. And the people who were like, about Bioshock, or didn't play the first Bioshock, you probably shouldn't even bother with it, because it's made for fans. It's made for longtime fans. And Bioshock Infinite, the story of Bioshock Infinite, is pretty well wrapped up in the main game. You don't need Barrel at Sea to put a bow on Bioshock Infinite. But if you want a bow on the Rapture story and a bow on the entire Bioshock universe as a whole, you have to play Burial at Sea. You know, it's fantastic. Again, episode 1, it's not going to blow you away. It's not going to amaze you. Episode 2 will, but you need episode 1 to get into episode 2 and understand it. And so, together as a package, episode 1 and episode 2 make a fantastic DLC. If you combine the hours of the DLC, you're looking at anywhere up to an 8 to 10 hour experience, which is fantastic. And you're going to love it. So, that's it's just so amazing to walk around, and you're going to hear a lot of familiar voices. You're going to see a lot of familiar faces because they got a lot of the original voice cast to come back. All the characters that they have in this game are voiced by their original voice actors. There's no one in this game that is a return character that's voiced by somebody different. It's all original actors. So it's just so cool to go back and see these familiar faces, hear these familiar voices. It's great. So, my recommendation for Bioshock fans, buy Burial at Sea and play it. You're going to love it and not be disappointed. So that's it, guys. Bioshock is over. Irrational Games are done. But they certainly went out on top. And though I'm going to miss Bioshock, I'm so glad that it went out on this positive note. And this series is going to be remembered for excellence and greatness, instead of being remembered for a series that made way too many cash-in titles and pittered out to nothing, like so many other series have done, by just trying to milk money. These guys knew when to go out on top. They put a tremendous icing on the cake with this DLC, this last episode, and they're going to leave Bioshock in a state of excellence and praise, and they're going to be remembered always for going out on top with a great game series, with a story that comes together nicely, and they didn't ruin it, which is, you can't complain about. So, that's it. Hope you enjoyed this review. Hope you found it helpful to you. Again, I'm going to have my full playthrough out on YouTube. I'm going to have this review up probably before I've uploaded the entire playthrough. So, if you're seeing this review within the first day or two, it's out. I may not have the whole DLC up yet, but it will be out. The whole DLC will be up very shortly after this review. So again, you can go check it out if you want, my full playthrough of it. And that's it. I loved it, really enjoyed it, awesome DLC. Buy it if you're a Bioshock fan. So, I'm Voodoo. Thank you very much for watching this review, and I will see you again real soon with more game reviews. And yeah, I'm excited about all the new games that are coming out and that I get to review. Infamous Second Son will be the next review I do. So, thanks a bunch, and hope to see you on the channel. Peace out.